So how do we embed quotes into an essay? You guys, yesterday and before this, I've asked you to use quotes to support your answers, correct? You've done a decent job of finding the quotes, but what you have not done a decent job of is integrating those quotes into your writing. So I'm going to teach you the simplest way to do that. First of all, whenever you use a quote, you may not just throw that quote in the middle of your writing. That is called quote plopping. I made that term up. It is not technical nor professional, but I call that quote plopping. It means you literally looked for a quote and just threw it in the middle of your writing because that's where you needed it to be. Whenever you have a quote, there needs to be 4 parts to every quote that you use. The first part is introducing the quote. Those are your words. You have to introduce the quote with something from your own brain. For example, when describing Paris's fears, Arthur Miller writes. That come from my brain. It didn't come from the book. It's how I introduced that I was going to use a quote. The next thing you need is the quote. Please make sure when you use the quote that you use quotation marks around the quote. Some of you were not doing that. You have to put the quotation marks to let people know that that quote is a word for word copy from whatever the source is. Next, we talked about this in the earlier. You need to have the citation. So the author's last name and the page number, or the author's last name and paragraph number if it's only 1 page. And then obviously afterwards you put the punctuation, which is the period. And then here's the additional part that perhaps you've not practiced before. You now need to explain why you use this quote. It's called the explanation. The explanation should always be the same length or more than your quote. I like to use the rule of double. If your explanation is always double your quote, that means that your essay will always have 2 times more of your own words than it does quote, which means that it's your essay. You're not just copying and pasting from other places. So for example, when describing Paris's fears, Arthur Miller writes, "There is a faction that is sworn to drive me from my pulpit." This demonstrates that Paris is paranoid and already feels that there is a target on his back before the incident with Abigail ever happens. Do you see how I explain the quote and how it's relevant or why it's relevant? That explanation piece is something new probably for you. When you are writing, we use quotes as support. Quotes are our evidence, and then we have to explain the evidence. Just like if we're in court, we can show the fingerprints on the mug to prove that this is evidence, but then you have to explain how that's important to the case. Same thing with this. You can use a quote to prove your point, but you have to explain how it proves your point. Does that make sense? You can, as long as you have these 4 pieces, your writing will be much better. If you become a pretty good writer, some of you are pretty good writers, what you will do is you can sometimes flip-flop the structure to make you sound a little bit more intellectual as a writer. So you can put the yellow part first and then do your red, purple, green. Or you can do the red, purple, green and put your yellow after it. It just depends on how comfortable you are as a writer. We're going to practice this right now. The question is, why are the girls so afraid of being accused of witchcraft? Here's your quote that I want you to use and your page number. And I want you to label it with the colors just like I do here. So go ahead and do it underneath, and we will check some of them when you're done. Okay, so my example is, the girls are afraid of being accused because, and that's my introduction, it is a crime punishable by death, is my quote, with Miller 34 as my citation. My explanation is, if one of the girls is accused, then they will most likely be hanged or burned with no way to prove their innocence.